Sir, thank you, kind sir. Oh, hang on. Apparently, there's a recording in progress. Let's just click that. I'm not sure why my saturation is ridiculous and I've got a face like a tomato, but we'll cover that on colour correction maybe a bit later. Thanks very much for having me back, folks. Digital Moses, leading from the creative wilderness to the land of can do. This is what we're all about. And I've called tonight, the edit is everything. So no pressure there. Because often somebody will say, oh, I've just shot a great movie. Well, you haven't. You've just acquired a load of footage. The actual movie is assembled in the edit. So it's the cornerstone of everything, really, isn't it? It's no good if you've got cards and cards full of the most amazing footage, but you don't assemble them correctly, because great footage edited badly is bad, but you can edit together bad footage and make it good. So hopefully, I'm not going to get into the precision of individual packages and how you do things, because obviously that might not be pertinent to everybody. So if I go on waffling on for half an hour about Final Cut Pro and you're all ensconced in Premiere, then you're going to be throwing tomatoes at me. I'm going to be even redder. So I've split it into a couple of sections today, and hopefully you're going to concur that this is the right approach. Otherwise, this is going to be a very, very short presentation. But the first is I've got 10 rules of editing, and then I've got 9 types of cut that are involved in the process. So if you familiarise yourself with all of the above and then discard accordingly, then we'll all be further along the road of our dreams now. So my first point is, if you can dance, you've got a head start with editing, because it's all about rhythm and timing. And that's really, although I'm going to go on and labour about 10 rules, we all know that rules are there to be broken. And it's really, this is more about, there's no hard and fast way of doing things. I'm going to give you some pointers from errors that I continually make. And hopefully if you can garnish some learning from that, that's win-win. But always with any sort of rule and technique, it's down to your own individual creative input as to whether you ignore them and go your own way. Ultimately, you've got to trust yourself and your own sense of aesthetics as to what works and what doesn't. So whereas I might say, don't do this or don't do that, there might be an instance, and there often has been instances implemented, where the thing not to do is the thing to do. So with no further ado, I'd start off by saying the most important relationship in filmmaking is, in IMHO, is that of the director and the editor. Now, if you're a self-shooter, that's quite easy because you're the director and the editor. Although that can sometimes work against yourself, because you spend most of the process second-guessing what you've done as to whether it would work with somebody else. So if you are self-shooting, in the sense of you're editing and you're directing, I recommend getting a trusty friend along to show some of your work to, and just see if it works, because often the story that we're telling is clear in our head, and you show it to somebody else and it's just blank, vacant expressions, isn't it? So if we're in a more traditional filmmaking environment where there's a director, your job as the editor is really to bring life to the vision that they have. Now, it could be a director in the traditional sense, but if you're doing any work for clients, then they've become the director. They've got an idea, even though they're offsetting to you to deliver their vision. They've often got an idea about what needs to be done and what doesn't. And I think the big danger is, with your editor's hat on, that you can be very precious about the graft that you've put in. It's singularly, I think, the most difficult portion of filmmaking, because it's quite solitary. You know, it's man versus, or lady versus machine, and you know, having the right environment to do that is really important. You know, having somewhere where you can sit and not be distracted, and be completely immersed in the process is paramount. And then you grind out the fruits of your labor, and you think you've come up with a Kubrick masterpiece. And then the client immediately wants to exert their authority by suggesting completely ridiculous amendments. And it's at that point the art of negotiation needs to be entered into, or just bite the bullet and deliver the customer is always right. So it's depending how you're approaching this and what your implementation is with this. But through toing and froing between what the director has as their vision and what you can implement through the tools that you've been delivered, there's a finite point that's reached. So to launch into this, I would say that the mantra for the editor is threefold, like all good mantras are. Be positive, be calm, and be creative. And I think that's the most important sort of mindset to have in all of this. Is we've all heard, or if we haven't, we're about to hear the most touted expression in filmmaking or content creation or whatever is, we can fix it in post. Well, obviously that the onus falls squarely on the shoulders of the editor if that's the case. There's a lot of sloppy work goes on in the field. With the proviso that it's all right because we can perform wonders at the editing slab, and it's at that point where, particularly again, if you're working with the director, the last thing that you need, that he needs or she needs or they need, is for you to have a negative response to what they want to implement. Your first response always needs to be, yeah, this is fixable. There's never an opportunity to fail. It's always an opportunity to overcome an obstacle, if you like. So in no particular order, we have some rules, and as I've already alluded to, there are no rules, you know, so I'm contradicting myself right from the off. But these are, well, you'll see what will work and what won't, but don't be afraid to discard them, because this isn't about parodying somebody else or aping somebody else. This is about developing your own style and your own voice. So we could all, every individual here could be delivered the same footage and come out with something different from that footage of their own interpretation. So it's not particularly the how-tos of the creative style, but these are just some little tips that might aid your process and your workflow. And that really is the key in this, is that you need to develop a workflow that works for you. It's all well and good, I can sit here and waffle on about my workflow, but if my gear is different or my approach is different, then you're trying to put a square peg into a round hole. So number one, without any further ado, I would say think more and shoot less. Now, it's a great idea, not always practical, but obviously, all being budding professionals, you'll enter the fray with a shot list, and you'll have an idea, whether that's written down. I suggest you write it down to begin with. As time progresses, you'll carry the shot list in your head. You'll know the shots that you need in order to convey your story, because experience will instill that into you. But initially, straight off the bat, make Make like an amateur shopper who trundles around the supermarket with a note in hand, bumping into trolleys and having a list of things that they want to acquire. That's not to say that you should be fixated on that list. You should always be flexible and consider the unconsidered. But I often approach things like a cheap Western, just go around and shoot everything, which is great. It will give you a plethora of footage, but it will give you such a nightmare. There's nothing like having 30 hours of footage to a 3-minute video to push you down the road of insanity. So while you're shooting, always have in the back of your mind the edits. Don't divorce the shooting and the editing processes. Have in the back of your mind where is you think you want to go with the edit. And the less you can shoot, obviously notwithstanding any contingency, but the less you can shoot, the easier the post-production process is going to be for you. Again, that's a rule that you can throw out. You say, Col, I've got a 128 gig SD card here and I want to fill it. Every time I leave the house, I want to cram that with so much footage I don't know what to do with. And that's the point, because as much as you can bimble home from your shoot with all this footage, it's the data wrangling and logging and sorting will become such a chore that the whole editing process will become something that you start to loathe. And really, that's well, certainly the key for me is you've got to retain the engagement with your own project. There's no good if you start hating what you're doing. It's self-defeating, isn't it? So first off, have a plan. This is number 2, by the way. So saying first off was completely stupid, Colin. Have a plan. What's your message? What's your story? You know, if you're in a filmmaking scenario where you've got a script and you've got a shot list, then great. You'll know what your story is. You'll have a screenplay. There'll be a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you'll be going out to capture that footage. But certainly, from my own perspective, a lot of what I do is in a live, as it happens, events sort of scenario. So you don't know what's going to happen until it happens. But the goal is to tell the story of what's unfolding before you. So you need to consider the elements necessary to what's unfolding. Without that, you're at a loss immediately. So forget the shooting part. You've got your footage. Before you even click a mouse or insert a card, have a clear idea in your mind what it is that you want to tell from that story. If you just get your footage and then you're making it up as you go, you've got a danger of painting yourself into a bit of a corner because you're being led by the footage rather than by your creative process. So that's the importance, because ultimately, as you know, we keep harkening back to this, the nub of what we are and what we're doing is we're storytellers, and our chosen medium is, digital film. So it sounds fairly obvious, but I think if we don't mention the obvious, then there's no precept upon precept, is there? So with that in mind, and I've put these in bad orders, really. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is file management. And it's really tempting to, as I say, have your footage and get back and bang it in the editor and fire it up and start tweaking this, that, and the next thing. I would say just pull the reins in a little bit of time out, a little bit of preparation goes a long way to saving you lots of headaches later. You know, so again, What works for me might not work for you, but develop some sort of file management strategy. I would suggest, I mean, I'll tell you what I do, and that might help, but I'll have a directory structure based on year and month, and then in the month, it will be the day, and it will be year first, then month, and then day. And if you format your date that way, you can sort on the date. So it's quite interesting. It's quite easy then, if you know, because obviously you keep a calendar and good records of what you've shot, then you can go straight to a day where that footage was. And I would say the important thing is, and we touched on it with the eminently disjointed show and tell the other week, that having multiple copies of your data is fairly important. From an IT background, I was always taught that if your data didn't exist in 3 places, it didn't exist at all. So it's no good just relying on the fact that I've got a card and that'd be great. I'll just keep the card and that's my backup, because cards can fail. So my first step, as soon as I get back from a shoot, is I'll create this directory structure with its day, and I'll copy the raw footage from the card into that day, and that sits there independent of what I import into an editor, which then becomes another copy. So that's my fallback day one, ground zero copy, if you like. The other thing is as well, it's not just the footage that you shoot that might go to fill up a project. There could be logos involved, there'd be music involved. We'll come on to music a little bit later. There could be any amount of other assets, as we'd call them, be they graphical or what have you. And it's an idea then perhaps to have a project folder somewhere, so that everything in that particular project lives in a directory, and you've got audio, you've got video, you've got graphics, whatever else. You might have your shot list or your brief, so that, you know, the tendency, isn't it, with computers, is that you've got bits and bobs all over the place, and you've got something in your documents folder, and then you've got something in your pictures folder, and you've got something in your movies folder. Get all that into one folder, so as that everything associated with your project lives in the same place. That's 101 really. Before you even go near an editor or start cutting, get everything organized so as that obviously when you implement your data backup regime, because we all back up our data regularly, don't we, everybody? Yes, of course we do. So should the unforeseeable catastrophe occur that your hard drive should fail, you can go to your backup, you can open your folder, and you're not then building everything from here and everywhere. So file management, and obviously that has the add-on to, develop a backup regime, get yourself a RAID system so that a hard drive can fail and you won't lose your data. You can wing it, but you know, if you do, you're the type of person that doesn't look left or right when you cross the road. You know, 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, you will make it to the other side unscathed. But it only takes one articulated lorry to make a real mess of the situation. And computers, you know, they can't be trusted, basically, as I'm sure we're all fully aware. And you've got to make as many contingencies for that. So there you are. You've got your data. It's all sorted. It's all in one place. And now let the magic begin. fire up your weapon of choice, and obviously there's lots of different editors, and I'm not, like I say, I'm not going to get into. I'm a Final Cut Pro man myself, but I won't hold against anybody else. If you choose to go another way, that's on you. But if you use a Mac, I would really, I'd be an advocate of Final Cut. It doesn't tie you to the cloud. It doesn't. I got my first copy of it 8 years ago or something when it came out. It was £200, and it's been updated frequently since then by the masters of Appleness. But there are other, as the disclaimer always goes, other editing solutions are available. And it could be Adobe, it could be DaVinci now is gathering some traction in the marketplace. Whichever your weapon of choice is, hopefully the other items that I'm going to talk about are all equally relevant, as opposed to if I just dive off into the intricacies of Final Cut Pro right now. Now, whichever editor you choose, I would highly recommend that you bone up on keyboard shortcuts. They're a little bit nerdy, a little bit geeky, but if you do master some shortcuts, then not only are a lot of them universal, such as J, K, and L, for example. Normally, in a piece of editing software, if you press J, the playhead will move backwards. If you press L, it will move forwards. If you press K, it will stop. If you can press one button to do the task, and there's various other command-driven shortcuts that can ripple trim to the end of a clip and so on and so forth. If you can use keystrokes to accomplish the task in hand rather than mouse clicks, not only will it save you suffering from carpal tunnel in years to come, but it will also give you the ability to get through your list of things to do with an alarming rate of speed. Not essential, but again, just a little tip. And so, with your thing, now I've got an approach to editing it, smaller projects, where what I'll do is I'll go out and shoot, and then I'll just basically drag the whole media bin or the event directory or whatever it is into a timeline, and I'll use that timeline to go through and sort the wheat from the chaff. Now, it could be argued that that's not the right way to do it, and that you should go through the media bins and mark in points and out points and reject clips. Again, it's what works for you. It's finding the solution that works for you. It's no good dragging everything onto the timeline because Colin said, and then having a complete nightmare because you don't think that way. So, but whichever your strategy is, whether it's drag it into the timeline and trim out the rubbish and, chuck away the chaff and be left with the wheat, or whether it's going through the media bins and rejecting clips and setting in points and out points for the things that you want to use, whichever way that is, that works for you, then adhere to that. Now, if it's a more involved project, a bigger, traditional production thing, maybe where there's more than one editor working on it, or it's larger, then naming your clips and logging and tagging becomes an issue. Now, if I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we're here with the aim of being self-shooters. So we're self-managing what we're doing. But it's good practice, again, before you start hacking away with anything, to tag and name your clips. It's not essential, but if it's a complicated project, it will pay back dividends. Now, if it's just a quick and dirty edit, I'd call it, where it's you're shooting and editing the same day, then you don't have that. You don't have that luxury. So you've got to trim your cloth accordingly. I know everything I'm saying here is fairly sort of, well, yeah, obviously, but it does as well just to go over the very basics. But the way I conceptualize what I'm doing when I put everything onto a timeline is I consider myself a Michelangelo of video editing, where the unassembled clips that come from the raw footage, it's like the rough hewn stone from which I shall bring forth a David, and it's a layering process like that. Just think of it like a sculptor. So you've got a whole load of rubbish. You could easily shoot. You could go out and shoot an event. You could easily get an hour's footage, and you need to make a minute out of it. The most important thing I would say is, if time you can afford it, is watch it. Not once, not twice, 3 times. Just watch through the footage. Because although you've seen it in the viewfinder when you've shot it, and obviously if you're working with footage that you've been delivered from somebody else, you haven't seen it. But just put it on once, and don't watch it forensically. Just let it wash over you, and then watch it again with the notion of, right, what am I going to use here? Now, most video editing software will have the ability to mark clips in your timeline. So when you're seeing something that you want to use, just drop a little marker in. It'll put a little, well, certainly with Final Cut, it'll put a little tab above the line, and you'll know where to come from, where to go back to. I can't stress enough the importance of being familiar with what you've got. And the more you can watch it, the more, if you can almost drive yourself mad with watching it, you'll see the bits that are absolutely woeful. Well, at that point, that's your first chisel stroke. Chop out that bit, and you're gradually refining down what you've got into things that can be used as your final story. So again, that's I wouldn't say that's the prescribed way of doing it. I'm just saying that's the way I've done it, and I've found that to be a lot faster than going through the bin and marking in points and out points. Because if you do that, you're just working off a clip, and you're not seeing the whole thing. So if you're watching all the footage that you've got, you're aware of every weapon that's in your arsenal for telling that story. Whereas you can miss clips when there's just little clips here and there. Get it all on the timeline and familiarize yourself. I always say, again, if time allows this, again, it often it doesn't if you're in that same day edit and shoot scenario. But if time allows it, watch it, sleep on it. The mind's a marvelous tool that who knows what goes on when you're in the land of nod, but it will come up with solutions and inspiration to things while you're asleep, and approaching things with a fresh pair of eyes, as it were, the next day will give you a totally new outlook. So what I'm attempting to say here is, if constraints allow it, don't saturate yourself with watching it all through and then editing it, and watch it through a couple of times, then go away, do something else, take your mind off the task in hand, and let the magic of the neurons conceive of a plan underneath the covers, as it were, in the subconscious mind. Okay, so The next thing I'm going to talk about is, and again, it's in no particular order, but the next thing I'm going to talk about is music and the importance of music in your edit. I'm finding now a lot of people for social media and the like, they all want some music underneath. And it's, I know Vic Reeves says that 95% of stats are made up on the spot, but I seem to be familiar with a quote from Steven Spielberg that said that 80% of a movie is the soundtrack. And it's not to be underestimated, the importance of music that will either support or work against what you're trying to tell. It's no good if you're telling some heart-rending story and you've got the Benny Hill music going on in the background. And it's no good if you've got if you're telling some comedic thing and you've got some heart-rending piece of Bach going on. You know, it's, again, it's obvious, but it's things that you need to consider. It's not just what you're watching. I heard a bit about audio. Well, I'll mention the audio thing at this point because it's music ties in with the audio. And when we get into cuts later, it becomes more important. But we mentioned this the other week. Bad audio is unforgivable in a viewer's mind. You watch something, and if there's pops and clicks in the audio, which often come where you drop a clip in, and the first couple of frames, what you'll need to do is either put a crossfade just on the audio, or feather in the first couple of frames, because when they butt together, they click. And I've worked on projects where multiple editors work, and if you found to have a click in your audio track, then you're buying the round that night. You know, it's one of those unpardonables. So it's important to get the audio right, because that's the seat of everything that you do. And I was always taught that what you need to do in order to make sure your audio is right is to block out the visual cues, because you're driven by your eyes a lot of the time and you're not listening because you're going off visual cues. So listen to it with your eyes closed, and you'll notice incongruencies in the audio quicker than you will if you're just watching it like it's a normal video, because your eyes will deceive you into overlooking those incongruencies. So it's important not just to consider the types of cut that we're gonna talk about, but it's important to get not only the right choice of music, but get the right level between dialogue and music. It's no good if one's, again, fairly obvious sounding, but it's no good if your music's dancing right over the top of your vocal track. And conversely, the other way, it's no good if you've got a big booming vocal track and the music's so faint that you can't even hear it. That's going to be more apparent to you if you listen. It sounds crazy, but it's true. If you shut your eyes and listen, that's a little bit further down the line towards the end. This is where we're putting the laurel leaf on the sculpture, getting the music right, because ultimately the first thing is that you get your shots in order, and then you join them together in a pleasing fashion. And one of the pleasing fashions that we can do is transitions. And I would urge everybody to be cautious and not over-egg the transition flam. You know, for every back in the day when I was taught theory, it was said to be for every 5 straight cuts you'd throw in a transition. Now, obviously, all bets are off now in this generation. But if you've got a transition after transition after transition after transition, well, you know yourself looking at it, it's discombobulating. You know, you need to really be sensitive, not just because you've got some fancy, wonderful transition that you've bought a transition pack and you just want to use them. Don't use them just because you've got them. Use them because they aid the transition between cuts, or that they might help. You know, I personally, I'm a fan of smash cutting and not using transitions unless I really, really have to. And what I'll try and do is, when I'm shooting, is at the end of the scene. I mean, and this might not represent your style, but this is just an example. Is if I'm shooting and at the end of the scene that I'm shooting, I'll whip the camera away. So I've created a whip pan transition in camera. And then I'll do the converse when I'm coming into a shot. So my transitions are in camera. You can use, obviously, you can speed ramp those pans to create quite interesting effects. Every good video editor has got, and some bad ones, to be fair, they don't have to be a good video editor to have it. But you basically, you'll build up yourself a toolbox of lens flare, clutter, static, little bits and bobs of stuff, basically stuff that you can plop over just a straight cut and create like a bespoke transition. So I've got like a load of old film lead-in footage. So it's captured off an old 16mm projector, and it's I don't know if you remember, but it's got like back in the day when you used film, they'd write on the header of the film, and you'd see that go through. And that's just an interesting bit of clutter that you can use to maybe as a lead-in, or maybe as part of a transition. Maybe if you're going from a piece to camera to some B-roll or some footage from the TV, then you can put in a bit of film clutter to... a couple of years ago, it was very popular to everything you saw, particularly on the sports coverage. It's always been the holy grail of sports coverage to try and make football interesting and visually appealing. So there was lots of lens flare and glitches that were put in between every sort of cut. But what I'm alluding to is, it's not just the transitions that you can drag onto a timeline that can make a transition. And there's an embarrassing array of transitions that you can buy and download that will be zoom pans and glitch transitions and all sorts. Your video editor will come with the basics. You cross dissolves. I mean, Final Cut comes with something called flow, which is actually quite good if you're doing a piece to camera and you need to chop a bit out and jump cut them together. We'll talk about jump cuts in a minute. But you put a flow transition on that, as long as the head hasn't moved too much, it will basically morph the two frames to look as though it's seamless. Again, you've got to be careful. It's not magic, but it can get you out of jail quite a few times. And I suggest, again, all of this is really trial and error to see what works for you and what works with your project and what works for how you want to do it. But I would say that don't over egg your flan. If you want to use a certain type of transition, then maybe stick with that transition through the piece and don't have all sorts of different things going on. unless you want to create that look. Like I say, these rules are there to be bent according to what your voice needs to say. And also, in the same way of don't over-egg the flan of transitions, don't over-egg the cut flan either. Too many cuts is going to be discombobulating. Now, it can be that's exactly what you want, because you want that chaos. You want that over-stimulated input. You know, if you're doing, and we're going to talk a little bit about montages again in the types of cut. So really, this is a precursor to what I'm going to talk about with the cuts. The cuts are your weapons, but without variation, they can become very disjointing. And this is where you, with your editor's hat on, need to trust, as I mentioned before, your own sense of aesthetics, of sitting back and watching it and going, well, that works. And this is even more where the sleep on it situation works, because I can't count the number of times where I've thought something is fantastic in the evening because I've been poring over it for 8 hours and just want it to be right. And the next day you get up and you watch it, you think, where was my head at yesterday? You know, and having that fresh approach, being immersed is one thing, but coming at it from a fresh set of eyes is another. And you'll realize that, oh, well, that doesn't work, or that doesn't work. Another great way is to drag a moderately consenting person into the room to watch what it is that you've done. And you can soon gauge by their energy of engagement how engaging your piece is. You can feel their concentration drifting, and as much as you will be completely enamored by what you've done, it might not necessarily translate with as much vigor as you possess. And when you watch it with somebody else, it's amazing that the time, and we all know that time doesn't really exist and it's only a relative concept, but the time appears to drag when somebody else is watching it. And you'll know that you might have to smarten that bit up. So that's why it's great if you're in the position where you can work with a director, because that's your immediate set of other eyes. But that's not always practicable. So I would suggest, if you can, and not every step of the way, and you don't want them to wee on your chips, am I allowed to talk in that fashion? And pour scorn on your creative process, because ultimately it's about your vision. But having that second set of eyes will be like, you'll just see from the glazed expression on the face that perhaps you've used too many zoom pan transitions in that, you know, and that you might possibly have to rethink it. So here we are with our freshly hewn stone of footage, and one thing that I'd really advise is that you take frequent versions, so that you save frequent versions of your edit, so that you know, maybe at different sort of points along the chain of production, so that if you do need to roll back, you can't always depend on my best friend is the Command Z function, which is undo. You know, so you start implementing a load of changes and you realize that you've gone completely insane and you need to back out. You can just Control Z and just undo. That might not necessarily always be the case, and particularly if you're working for a client and you'll send them a first rough edit, then save that as version zero point 0.1 or what have you, and then duplicate the project and then continue working on it from version 0.2. That means that if you need to track back, you've got an antecedent, a generational copy that will enable you to undo any changes for whatever reason. I think versioning is really important, and the thing is, it doesn't cost you anything in disk storage to constantly version what you're doing, because obviously a project doesn't actually contain any data. It's just markers to files that are living somewhere else. So don't be afraid of going, okay, well, I've got me rough cut. Well, let's save it there. And now, okay, this is my trimmed cut, and let's save it there. And this is the one with the music in, and let's save it there. There might be other iterations in between that are pertinent to save. But again, if you can develop these sorts of disciplines from the off, it's like learning how to drive, isn't it? If you can get into good habits, I'm sure when we all learn, well, for the drivers amongst us, and I do apologise for people who don't, but when we learned to drive, we religiously had our hands at 10 to 2 on the wheel. How soon did that go out the window once you got that little pink slip? Fairly quickly, I suggest. But these are the things that we need to sort of absorb and get onto right habits from the off. And I've learned the hard way through not having the ability to flip back to where I was 3 days ago. Maybe if you're editing over several days, that might be an idea for how you version your edit. Version it by date. And then you can go, well, I had an aberration on Wednesday, so let's go back to Tuesday. Again, no hard and fast way. Don't do it because Col says. Do it because it works for you. Well, no, do it because Col says. Yes, that's definitely the way forward. And that leads into not doing it because I said, and I did touch on this earlier, the software that you use, as much as I'm an advocate of Final Cut Pro and it really works for the work that I do, it may not work for the work that you do. So find the piece of software that works for you. Have a little look on YouTube. Don't Google it. Use DuckDuckGo and search for the different types of things, and there'll be somebody out there that's done a tutorial on something or other, and you can see if that looks like the sort of package that you might want to use. Obviously, if you use Mac, you can that comes with iMovie, which can get you a certain way along the way. I'm not too sure what's available in the PC environment, but I'm sure you can pick up Adobe at some ridiculously low rates these days. But again, there's no point using it just because that's what everybody else uses. You need to find something that you're comfortable with and that suits your way of thinking and your way of working. Again, really straightforward stuff. I've not been keeping up with my numbering system, but this is number 10. You'll be pleased to know. And this is more pertinent. Well, it works for self-shooters if maybe you shoot the piece to camera and you're doing multiple takes. But normally, or if you're working with talent, and I use that in inverted commas, and you're taking takes, normally the last take that you take is the one that you're going to use, So when you drag everything into your timeline, work from right to left, because that's your last take and that's the one that's going to work. So you're not having to work through all the takes that were rubbish. You're immediately on the one that worked for you. Now, it could well be that you're in a more structured environment and you've got an assistant who's logging which takes and so on and so forth. But I'm assuming that we're going to be sort of out here as individuals versus the world. So we're spinning more plates than the Chinese circus. And it's about keeping the process as simple as possible. So I would suggest, the clap is every filmmaker's, no, not that clap. Clapping your hands, making an audio signal is the best friend that we've got. Not only if we're, as we mentioned the other week, if we're working with separate video and audio acquisition and you want to sync it up later, but if you're doing multiple takes of a thing, then in between and the camera's rolling, you know, if you're self-shooting, then normally you're going to shoot yourself and carry on shooting, and it's a bit of a faff then after every time you've fluffed. And I know we're all one take wonders and there won't be any fluffing going on, but after every time you've fluffed, to go back to the camera and press the button and so on and so forth. Well, just keep going and clap, and then the clap will mark your tape. You take. I mean, it's basically what used to happen with the old clapperboard. That was the whole point of the clap coming down, to give an audio representation of the marker, to make a marker, so that when you're in the edit later, you can look through and use your audio line to go, oh, well, look, that's where that take started. And again, if you're working from right to left and your last take was beautiful, then you just scuffle along, go to your peak in the audio waveform, and there's your in point. So so there's the 10 rules that can or cannot be broken. The choice is yours. I hope that helped. Okay, so we'll go on to types of cut. If it didn't, then it's...
Hold on a minute, Colin. Right, hold on. Right, just run us through the 10 rules again.
The 10 rules. Okay, yeah. Number 1, think more, shoot less. Number 2, have a plan. What's your message and your story? Number 3, content first, tweak it later. In fact, let me just add a couple of layers to number 3 there, because this is a big sort of it's very easy to get your footage and to get it in, and then the first thing you do is you're doing some sort of color grading on it, or you're altering the audio and you're putting a compressor on it and all this. No, tweaks come later. Get your content in first, and that's where the sculpting thing comes in. So think more, shoot less, have a plan. Content first, tweak it later. Number 4, file management. Number 5, keyboard shortcuts. Number 6, the importance and relevance of music. Number 7, don't over-egg the flan. Number 8, versioning. Number 9, what software is right for you. I should have done this a bit slower, I realise, shouldn't I, for those of you taking notes? I do apologise. And number 10, might or might not work for you, but it's a good little tip, is edit from right to left. Certainly if takes is a thing. So, should we do that again? No, are we all good with that?
Right. This time with feeling, Colin.
This time with feeling. This time I'll take a breath. I need to learn how to take a breath, really, don't I? It's all a bit frenetic.
No, so, that's great. No, that's great, Colin. That's great. We've got the 10 rules. That's brilliant. Before we move on to cuts, any
questions? No, when's it over is the question. When's he going? Right, so I'll take that as no, Col, that was all ace. So I've got 9 types of cut. It's all I could think of. There may be more. So please don't castigate me if I missed any out. But these are the sort of standard sort of film school types of cut. And the way that you implement them will be different according to your software. So I'm just going to sort of talk through what they are, and you can then realize, oh, I need to use one of these at this juncture, and investigate how to implement it accordingly. So The first type of cut, which is my favourite because ultimately it's the laziest and easiest to get away with, is the straight cut. So it does exactly, surprisingly enough, it does exactly what it says on the tin, and it's a straight cut from one clip to another. No faffing about, no transitions, nothing like that. Now, it's probably worth mentioning at this point that straight cutting, as an example, when you watch football, you'll never, or highlights of football, you'll never get a wide shot of the pitch cutting into another wide shot of the pitch, because that would become a jump cut, and we're going to talk about them in a minute. It would always have a different angle or scene or context. So it's just something to be wary of, that putting two clips together, if the scene doesn't change, then you're going to create a jump. Now that might be what you're going for, but chances are it won't be. And with my ancient news gathering head on, I was always taught that jump cutting was the biggest no-no that you can do when you're telling a piece of propaganda, as it were. Whereas nowadays, jump cuts are all the rage for moving things on, and I notice a lot of people do pieces to camera, and all their ums and ahs taken out, and it's just smashed together. And that's a style. That's perfectly acceptable. And there's some. I've got some tips for using jump cuts coming straight up. Let's see what I did there. Straight up, straight cut. Jump. Anyway, jumping on to number 2. The jump cut is basically a way of, you've got a sequential clip, as I say, and you're just basically taking bits out and you're smashing them together. So the logical progress of time jumps. Now, this is quite good for, as I say, for a lot of influencers do it now. They'll be talking, and to get rid of the spurious information. What you can do is, if you're in an interview situation and you want to trim out what they're talking about, little bits to get the best sound bites together. Where if you just take the bit in the middle out and then cut them together, then you've got a massive movement or jump like that. So what you can do is you can basically zoom into the shot. You can make the shot bigger so that on the cut it looks like the camera zooms in. Now that's great. However, one thing to keep that discombobulation at bay, I'm on commission for how many times I can say discombobulation this afternoon. So that's about 4 I'm up to, isn't it? Is that if you have got this frame that you can see here, and then the next frame, I've cut a bit out the middle, and then the next frame I've zoomed in, then adjust it so that the eye line matches, and it's actually easier to watch. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So because obviously people's heads are bobbing around, and if you zoom in, you're changing the perspective. Now, if my eyes are up here on one shot and down here on another, then our natural propensity as human beings is to make eye contact. So your eyes are chasing them all around the screen. So if you are going to crop in to get rid of the bit in the middle to make it less jumpy, then I'll just move the frame so that your eyes are in level. Just a little one you can have for nothing there. It's just a little bit extra. See how good these guys are to you. Giving you all that. So the next type of cut we're going to get into is called the J cut. Not to be confused with the jump cut, because it's got the same initial. And that's basically where one cut So you've got one clip here, and you've got your next clip, and your preceding clip. The audio from the preceding clip comes underneath. Does that make sense? So you're leading in with the audio from your next clip, rather than if you've got two people talking and you're cutting the audio according to the two heads. You might have the head of the first person with the start of the response from the second before you cut to them. It's a more seamless way of covering dialogue, because you're not cutting the audio and the video at the same time. Have I explained that anywhere near in a coherent point of view? I'm getting a couple of nods and a few thumbs. That's awesome. Awesome stuff.
Colin, what kind of cut was that called? Sorry.
That was called a J cut.
A J cut. Okay.
A J cut. Yes. Please don't ask me why. Martin will tell you. Martin will tell you in the next segment. And the next one.
Surely it's because part of it, your cut is part of it carries on like a J. That's why it's called.
Ah, there you go. You see.
Anyway,
you see. This is why we defer to the professor.
Carry on, Colin.
Awesome.
Your own time.
No pressure. So the next one we've got is the converse to the J cut is the L cut, which is, and I'll tell you why it's called an A cut, because an L cut, because it looks like an L. Awesome. You see, it's a learning adventure. It's a learning adventure for us all. Basically, this is where the audio from the first cut leads into the second cut, which is it's completely the reverse of what we've just described. So if you can conceptualize the pain and torment of what I've just been through describing the J cut and reverse it, it's what we need to do. So if it's a two-head sort of interview sort of situation, and you've got on each subject, you first person is talking, and as you cut to the next person, he's finishing the question while the vacant expression of the second person looks on before the audio picks up. Again, it's less jarring, and I would say, and in fact, I'm just gonna reverse back a little bit and say, you might well be in a situation where all this editing stuff sounds absolutely fantastic, and I really want to get stuck into this, but you might not actually have any footage to do it. And so I would say, download a video, and recut it. Just use any, it doesn't have to be your footage. As long as you're not going out and burning some DVDs and selling them on Grady Market, then you'd be all right. Just, for educational purposes, see, not only watch how the editor has done these things. I was just cutting a piece from The Matrix before, and the discourse between Morpheus and Neo, where he's offering him to take the red pill or the blue pill, and watch that sequence, and that's a perfect example of J and L cutting, where Morpheus is maintaining the dialogue while it cuts to Neo, and vice versa. And there's a myriad of examples that I haven't prepared to share with you, so humble apologies. Only one pair of hands. So the next thing we've got is cut on action. What's this mean? So it might not necessarily be that every one of our productions includes a fight scene, but this is a good way of sort of describing the situation. So if you've got multiple cameras filming somebody having a fight, you don't want to cut before or after the punch is thrown. You want to cut as the punch is thrown. So that's cut on action. Now, it might not be a punch. It might be somebody jumping into a swimming pool, or it might be somebody closing a car door. It's, again, all these types of cuts, what they're doing is they're making us as viewers feel that the aesthetic is more natural, and to cut before the punch is thrown to the punch itself, where it lands. If you see that on the screen in front of you, it just doesn't work. It doesn't look right. So that's why when there is action taking place, it's important to cut on the action and not before or after the action. So it could be you've got a couple of angles of somebody taking a pair of headphones off. So you want to cut from one angle to another, and it's as the headphones are moving that you cut to the other one and pick up the continuation of that move, rather than going from, I've moved the headphones, now I'm looking at the other angle. Does that make sense? So that's called cut on action. It might have a better word, better name. The next one, number 6, we're on now. We're flying through these. We're really picking up the pace. I hope I'm all right for time. Or I hope you've got lots of questions at the end if I'm going too fast. The next one, number 6, is called cross-cutting, or it could be known as parallel cutting. And that's where you're given the impression that it's between two different scenes, basically. And it gives the impression that something is happening simultaneously. So you've got two scenes in your scenario, and you're cutting one to the other, and in doing so, you're really conveying that what's taking place is happening simultaneously in 3D linear time. Okay. The cutaway, the ubiquitous cutaway. Now, this is everybody's friend, and it can actually, I'm going to tie this in with the straight cut and link it in with what we were talking about with the audio being king, particularly if you're doing like a documentary piece, or you're telling a story which is based around talking heads, and the dialogue of what they're saying is important. But in order to create that dialogue, you might have a jump cut right in the middle. You know, you've cut out a few ums and ahs, and you've got a big jump, and you don't want to crop in because it's a little bit MTV style, and you want it being a little bit more panorama. So what you can do is you can cut away to a bit of the ubiquitous B-roll, because obviously that's an important part of your footage arsenal. Isn't just your narrative footage, but there's supporting pictures. It could be that you use something that, or footage, that don't have to be pictures, but you can use pictures and put a nice little Ken Burns effect. Ken Burns was a documentary filmmaker, and it's basically a way of easing into a picture that makes a static picture have a bit of movement. There's other ways of transversing the frame and things, because if you're going from a movie to a still image, it's again discombobulating. Bing! There's another one for me. It disrupts the flow. So a little bit of movement across the frame, you can get a picture, and you can transverse up the frame as a reveal, like a bit like you would with a pan. So where were we there? Oh yes. So the cutaway, it might be nice as well if you are masking these straight cuts. So our audio is nice, our interview audio is nice, our dialogue is nice, but you've got these horrendous cuts that you want to mask, well, this is our greatest friend in all of this is the cutaway, and you're cutting away to B-roll that basically supports what your piece is about, or perhaps illustrates where it's taking place with a bit of context, or illustrates what the person's saying. Well, you can just drop these in the timeline above the cut, you know, and even the cut is immediate, but you might want to mask it for 10 or 15 seconds by having 3 different shots. Apparently, the rule of 3 is quite nice in this. It's quite pleasing. We like to see things in 3s. So, you know, why use 1 when you can get away with a handful? Again, it's going to depend on what your subject is and what you've got. But I can't stress enough the importance of having decent B-roll on a shoot that can hide all these things. Because with the best will in the world, you're not going to get away with having to not hide something at some point. And once you've applied this technique, you can spot it at a million paces in somebody else's work, where something's been smashed together and the joint is hidden. Again, being careful where you are taking out ums and ahs, which is quite easy and very effective. He says putting a pertinent in there. That make sure that you're doing that little audio fade, that little crossfade, not on the picture, but on the audio, just to stop any pops or clicks appearing at the time of cut. Because you're going to want, again, because we've all listened to it with our eyes closed, we can immediately tell where levels are different and things need adjusting, and you know, trust your own sense of aesthetics and your own ear and your own eye for what looks good and works. Moves us nicely onto the montage. I know this is one of Mr. McGinnis's favorite techniques. He's a big fan of a montage. And aren't we all? It's a montage is basically a way of using a series of distinct, separate images, either moving or still, to create a continuous sequence. So you've got the ubiquitous training montage, haven't you, from Rocky? You know, to compress a sequence of time and events into a small period of time. I'm particularly, you know, I'm going to show my age here now, but you can ask your grandparents about a TV series called The A-Team, which each week the highlight was to have the montage of how they made some world-beating piece of machinery from a oxyacetylene blowtorch that was just lying around in some jungle woodland shed. But that's a fantastic way of compressing time in your story. If you know, and we've seen it probably 10,000 times, where somebody talks about going somewhere, and then we'll have a little smash cut montage of them putting you'll have a shot of the key in the door, and the next thing you'll have the door opening, and then the next thing it will be the speedo, and the next thing it will be some fumes coming out the. You know, there's a million different implementations of this that you'll all be familiar with, but it's a good way of, you know, shots that won't sit together in a more contiguous traditional timeline can all live together happily and in harmony under the guise of a montage. And then number 9. I've got a few little extra tips as well at the end, so don't think it's all over with number 9. We're nearly there. We're nearly at the finish line. Is match cuts, and I was the best example of a match cut I can think of although Martin will probably have a myriad of them. But it's Space Odyssey. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Stanley Kubrick's Space Odyssey, which is actually even older than I am, which is surprising that they even had film that's older than me. However, there's a scene right at the very start where there's an ape and he chucks a bone in the air, and it cuts, as the bone twists through the air, it cuts to a satellite in the same orientation as the bone. That's an example of a match cut. We might see them more latterly applied in adverts, like holiday adverts, where you'll get a couple hand in hand, pass me the bucket, running along the beach, and they'll jump. And as they jump in the air, it'll get them on another scene jumping into a pond or something. You know, that's an example where a match cut is basically two different scenes, but it helps draw a sense of connection between the two different scenes. So it could be, well, let's not pressure me to think of any more inane implementations of that. Whereas I think you get the rub of what I'm saying. So finally, I've just got a couple of little things just to mention, because I couldn't shoehorn them into the rest. One thing I'll talk about, I don't know whether this is cropped up anywhere else, but from an editor's point of view, I'll talk about crossing the line. And this is quite important if you've got two subjects. Crossing the line is basically if you draw a line, an imaginary line. You don't actually have to go and draw a line, but if you draw an imaginary line between the two subjects, this is another form of discombobulation if you break this rule. So not only do I get another ding in the corner, but you get away with not messing people up. Now, again, this can be broken and has been broken in film in order to cause that jolt in perception. But if you've got two subjects and there's an imaginary line, you don't take that camera over the line. So the subject on the left always appears on the left, and the subject on the right always appears on the right. If you do cross that line, it's called the reverse angle, and it does leave you disorientated. Now, some directors, stroke editors, have used that, but normally you wouldn't. And you get berated heavily in commercial film for crossing that, because the axis of the two subjects needs to remain stationary to give you that sense of to and fro. Does that make any sense? It's a bit difficult to explain without the use of diagrams. Martin will explain it with great clarity later. And I'll just set him up for that. That'd be wonderful. Thank you, Martin. So we've talked about adding flavour without transitions. We talked about lens flares and lead-ins and so on and so forth. It's again in your little arsenal of weaponry for doing your edit. You can build up little transparent PNGs and things. I've got my particular favourite is a load of old TV sets with the middle cut out. So if I want to refer to archive footage, again, you can't over-egg this. You can't, if you overuse it, it's already is with this old 50s TV set again. But it's a nice little trick for adding a little bit of variety and engaging people, that you're able to then, if you're using a bit of old footage, that you can drop like some aged TV effect on the footage, resize your frame, drop the transparent PNG over the top, and hey presto, you've got a 1950s telly shot. So they're just little examples of added flavour. They're sort of getting into the where you can really let yourself go wild. I'm a big fan of really messing people up, and people hate it, but I really like it, is having your main storyline going on and then dropping another another timeline over the top with 50% opacity, so it's semi-translucent. So you've got two different things going on at once. You can, again, back to the thing of, if you haven't got the footage, go and get some. Music videos are great for this. I've just done one with a White Stripes video, where I've cut it up and overlaid it with other things. I made something completely different, just for the halibut, really, not for any financial gain or fiscal prostitution, just because if I don't get my hands on editing, I go a bit loopy. So that's the adding the things. We're also, another thing to mention, which is right at the end of your process, once everybody's happy, so everybody happy with the edit, then you can start with your color correction and your lookup tables, which basically, that's the again, this was very popular a couple of years ago. Everything was magenta and teal, or everything was had a hue shift, which was a look, which was a style. Instagram is normally the great protagonist and driver of these sorts of styles, but lookup tables are a thing that you basically, it tells your editing software to shift the color palette of what you've got into a slightly different hue. And there's as many lookup tables as there is lookup tables. They're myriad. People sell them as add-ons. You can make your own in Photoshop, which is a bit involved, but it's possible. If you find a lookup table that you like, it can become part of your trademark. It can give you a particular look. It's not it doesn't mean that it's going to make bad footage look good, but it's going to be things, again, like back to the films like The Matrix. They've been colorized. And color graders is a specialized job, but we as self-shooting editors have got to absorb some of those skills. So that I would suggest you look up in your video editing software how it is that that you can increase contrast. So you use your video scopes. You can crush the blacks, make it look a little bit, make your blacks a little bit blacker, gives it that richer sort of look in the contrast of your shot. Other things, again, all these things to be used sparingly, but a great trick to make what is pretty average look like cinema straight off the bat is to drop on some sort of widescreen aspect ratio effect, make it 2.35, give it that nice letterbox look, bang, immediately you've got a movie worthy of your local multiplex. And similarly, you've got the vignette thing, which again, if you're doing something that is looking back in time, you can drop an aged film thing on it, put a little vignette around it, and a modern piece of footage can be made to look like it's older with just some simple adding on of effects. So, where does that leave us?
Better informed than we were at the start, which is a great thing. Absolutely brilliant stuff, Cole. Thanks for that. There must be a million questions after that.
I think I've covered film editing so conclusively that how can there be anything I've left out? Listen, there's a million things I've left out. These are the bare bones of the skeleton on which you put the flesh and you dress accordingly. You know, that hopefully it's you've learned something from the years that have given me this. I was fresh faced and dark haired when before I started video editing.
See, last week, Cole, we had Jai, who is a cameraman, who, like you, began life on the news. Right, he worked for ITN News, BBC News, and so on. And he said something really interesting, which was what made him a better cameraman was editing. As soon as he got into editing, he realized a whole lot of stuff about sequencing images that made him better as a cameraman. Your thoughts?
He's absolutely spot on. I would agree 1,000,000% on that. You know, I've done work as purely a cameraman where I give the card to somebody and that's job done. And that's great. And I know some editors that started off as cameraman, but they couldn't take the pressure of, you know, because the cameraman, if you don't get the shot, and certainly in news I'm talking about now, if you don't get the shot, then you're hung. That's, you know, and it's an awful, you're behind a layer of protection because you can blame the cameraman for not giving you the right material when you're the editor. And you're not at the sharp end. You're making magic of what you've been delivered. But it's exactly right what you're saying, and it's right back to number one. I'm sure we all remember what number one was in the first list. It's the think more, shoot less situation, and from editing, your man there has realised what it is that's required in a good edit from the cameraman. So you're able to deliver because you've got a sympathy for, you know, it's not an us and them environment. If you're ever working between a cameraman and an editor, it should always be we're all in it together. But inevitably, it's like the stormtroopers and the Wookiees. They sit on different tables, you know, and there's a great tendency to put ourselves in the us and them situation. So to sit the other side of the fence, you definitely do get a sympathy and an awareness for the trials and tribulations of your comrade. Certainly, and I've been fortunate in the sense that I was trained as a video journalist. So the goal was always to be sent out into the wild blue yonder with a camera and have to come back with a story. So I couldn't hide behind, you know, that it was just on the cusp of when news gathering was changing. So that it used to be that you'd have a cameraman and a reporter, and between them they'd clutch together some sort of story. But that changed then because some wag somewhere with a spreadsheet realised that, well, can't we just send one person out to do the both? And lo, the self shooter was born. But it definitely does you good to immerse yourself in other disciplines in the industry because you get a more well-rounded knowledge of what's required. But it's definitely it. And again, you know, it's great being a self-shooter because you get the best of both worlds. You get I'm out and about in the real wide world and I'm being a bit of a hermit this week. Whereas that doesn't suit everybody. Some people might prefer it's just me versus the machine, and it's great because there's nobody in my face. Whereas some people like to be out there in people's face, and some people like the both. So, you know, it's mix and match accordingly, isn't it? But he's completely right, you man.
I'll pass that on. Cole says Digital Moses says he's right, so that's
Listen, he'll sleep easier. He'll sleep easier of an evening with that knowledge embedded.
Right. Do we have any questions where we've got Cole? Right. Okay. Kira, go on.
Yeah, it's not specifically about editing. I was just gonna say, have you got any like website suggestions for, like you were saying, you've got like sort of PNG style like clips. I don't know what you call the actual video. Are they still called PNGs if they're like video clips?
Oh yeah, well I suppose
Yeah.
they're more gify, aren't they? I
Yeah,
suppose.
because I'm
Uh,
thinking of using some old footage of like Liverpool, and I was just thinking if there's any sort of like film cutting style thing where it's like rolling. I was gonna say, have you got any like website suggestions of like stuff for that, or do you like buy sets and things?
yeah, I've filched mine off fellow editors over the years.
Okay.
So I've got I've got a library, a Final Cut library called video.fx,
Mhm.
And it's basically things that I've come across. And YouTube's a good place nowadays. You can get a
Yeah.
lot of overlays and green screen stuff.
Mhm.
So it'll be a short loopy video with a green screen behind that you can just key out.
Yeah.
So I would say search engines are your friend on that, and you know, DuckDuckGo is the weapon of choice in this house because it doesn't put trackers everywhere. But
Yeah.
other search engines are available,
Mhm.
And just use the drop down of if it is just a transparent PNG that you want, just search for old TV and then drop down the type as PNG, and that'll give you something. But if it's short clips,
Mhm.
then it's surprising. There's quite a lot of stuff available on YouTube, and I don't. What do you use? What sort of computer do you use?
Well, I use Premiere Pro, so like
On a
software
Mac? On a
wise.
Mac though?
Well, I have got a Mac, but I use my desktop for like editing. So
Okay,
yeah,
I
I
mean,
use Premiere
well,
Pro. But...
there's a thing. There's a thing called YouTube minus DL, and I'm not sure if it's available on PC, but I certainly know it's a homebrew solution that can install on Unix machines, and it's
Okay.
basically just a command line that you pass the URL to, and it'll download the video for you.
All right. Yeah.
Which is super.
Oh, cheers. Yeah.
Shh, don't tell anyone.
Do you want to stick that in the chat, Cole? Do you want to stick the
YouTube DL? I'll have a go. Where's the chat down the bottom?
Thanks, Colin. Cheers.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, unfortunately, like I say, I've been like the Borg, and you know, over the years you work with people, and it's like, oh yeah, I've got some lens flares, and they'll go, oh, I've got some film clutter, you know, and it's just a sort of a sharing exercise. So I'm sure if there's anything in particular, you know, like film lead-ins or anything like that, get in touch with Martin, and I'll send him some swag, and he can send it you.
Yeah, thank you.
As you're an award-winning Screen Life producer, then.
Oh, I can't take too much credit for that, you know. Do you know?
Oh no, do.
They offered me like the money for it. I couldn't take it. I didn't.
What do you mean you couldn't take it?
No, I couldn't. No, because I thought, well, all I'd done really was a bit of script editing, and I sent like a voice note of my lovely Scouse accent to them. But I couldn't take it. I couldn't do it.
Of course you can. That's
no.
Listen, I can manage any excess rubles you've got.
Really, oh no, I felt guilty. I couldn't.
Nonsense! Take the bloody money.
I'll sell you some film clutter. No, I know you.
As soon as I said, "Oh, like, are you sure?" They were like, "Well, we'd use the money for future projects." I was like, "Oh yeah, whatever. Like, that's fine." So
they're not using it for future projects.
Well, the future project's probably the pub. So
yeah, that's what they're spending the money on. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, any other questions for Cole? Stephanie.
Hi, Cole.
All right.
Have you got any tips for exporting? And I use Final Cut Pro like you, so everything you said, I've been like, yes. But yeah, if you've got any tips for exporting,
well, do you know what? Thanks very much for finding me. I was just seeing who was paying attention, because there's a massive piece of the food chain that I've missed out, isn't there? We've talked about editing, and everything's currently still in our software, isn't it? So exporting, yeah, of course. You know, if we don't export our project, then who's ever going to see it? Well done, Steph. You get the award for paying attention.
Thanks.
So yeah, there's a couple of ways about this. I use basically I'd say export it as the ProRes version, which is big. It's like export MOV. You know, don't if you try stuffing it down the H.264 converter to make an MPEG, it takes a long time.
Yeah, because I think on the Final Cut Pro one it says master file. And
master file, that's what you want.
Yeah, that's what I normally do it as. Yeah.
And then you're not getting any. I mean, I know MP4 is very good, and I'm not slagging it off, but it is introducing compression artifacts. Where you want to get your media out of your editor in as high a quality as possible. So if it's ProRes 444, you've got no you've got no loss of bit depth or anything. It could be unwieldy in the size, but what you then do is you either you make Apple even happier by getting a copy of compressor. But there's another tool. I'll put it in the chat. It's called Handbrake.
Okay.
And this is what before I was wealthy enough to buy compressor. I think it's called. I think it's .fr is the. But if you search for Handbrake, it's free, which is free, and it's actually it's tremendous. It can compress all sorts. You can throw at it. It can compress MKV files. It can compress the raw master file out of Final Cut. But if you are using Final Cut, just check that the type of file that it's spitting out is ProRes at its max. You just drag the file into Handbrake. There's a load of settings, frame rate, FPS. There's presets as well, so you can get super high quality. Just see what works for you.
Okay.
That will compress it to a magnitude where it's acceptable size to WeTransfer to somebody or upload to YouTube. Okay. I'd steer clear of the presets that upload straight to YouTube.
Yeah, I've done them before, and it takes forever, or it doesn't work, or it's you know, when you press play on YouTube, it's really low quality, and then about when you get to the end, it's like, I'm high res now.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's better to sort of take command of that, and also it does fail often, and you end up with 47 videos on your channel of half-rendered videos, which is just a nightmare in housekeeping. So. Very good point, well made. I'll add these to the notes should this ever happen again with another fortunate group of people.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks.
Awesome. Handbrake.fr. I'm not on commission. Compressor is you know, I use motion compressor and Final Cut because I'm a complete sucker, and they all hold hands with one another. But compressor is basically, I think it's only about 50 quid. It's not, you know, it's easy to say only 50 quid, isn't it? But, you know, in the big scheme of things, and it can, if you need to do any ProRes derivatives, it's better, because basically Handbrake is only a graphical front end for a thing called FFmpeg, which is a suite of open source software that sits underneath, and ProRes is a proprietary codec of Apple. So there was an occasion where I had to produce some specific ProRes files for the client that Handbrake couldn't handle, so it pushed me down that route. But normally, if you are just encoding for YouTube, I used Handbrake for years, and I was a very happy bunny. Any more for any more? No, please go. They said I've got blood coming from the ears.
then that's been an amazing session, Cole. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
What I thought you were coming to talk about was how to use Final Cut Pro.
Was it?
Yeah, so you need to come back next week and tell us about how to.
I mean,
use
I
Final
kind
Cut
of,
Pro.
well, I did consider that, but I was sort of aware from the litmus test that I did with me show and tell that only really highly switched on people like Steph are using, and I'm only pulling everyone's leg who isn't using it, is using Final Cut Pro. So I didn't, I was a bit concerned about me getting into the vagaries and the intricacies of Final Cut, and everybody to going, pass me the rope, Colin. You're really not making any sense to me.
Who's using Final Cut Pro, or what are people using?
Well, just out of interest, can we just have a little whip through and just to satisfy my curiosity?
I use Final Cut Pro. I used it at university a lot. So I'm using it now to edit my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary video. So I've kind of got a lot of experience using it, and I use it quite a lot because I bought it and it has it. And then like other processors, it doesn't cost updating it. It works really well, and I enjoy using it. But nice and simple.
Very simple, very, very quick workflow.
Yeah. And as you say, the keyboard shortcuts are so simple that once you've done it, it's like second nature now. I have used Premiere Pro as well, but that's like, I'm just teaching myself how to use that now. So that's it.
Any more? Is everybody Adobe heads, are they? I mean, I won't hate you.
We've got Sarah saying in the chat that she's used Windows Movie Maker, but hasn't used anything else for a while.
Okay. Anybody using iMovie? No, we're all Adobe heads.
Phil's using iMovie. Antonio, what are you using?
My computer is Windows. It's HD Movie Maker. HD Movie Maker, yes.
See, so there's as many different pieces of software as there is participants, isn't there? So I really hope I haven't broken your heart, Martin, waffling on for an hour and a bit about something that I was completely not booked to do.
I've heard your lecture on Final Cut Pro. I think it's great. It's like the opera. I'd listen to it again and again.
God bless you, sir.
Jay's using Premiere Pro. Christopher's used FCPX in there as well. So there's lots of stuff. Matthew, you got your hand up for a question?
Yeah, Colin, I just wanted to ask him. I know with the other speech you were talking about equipment, you were talking about, not getting into this pathway of, buying the latest gear, being like, being clever about it, and with regards to editing, that's exactly what you need to do. You need to be clever with the way the workflow goes. How would you say, as an editor, you've developed, and how will you continue to develop in terms of the future with technologies and everything advancing? What tips would you give everyone in terms of, because the only way that I know to learn is obviously just by doing, but is there any sort of like method, anything else that you could? I
would say that it's like everything else. There's fashions and trends, isn't there? In the way that things are, the way that videos look now is completely different to 15 years ago. And, the democratization of creativity has given this greater range. I'm completely in your camp. The best way of learning is just by cracking on and doing it, because that's when you make mistakes. You can read somebody else's books until they're coming out your ears, but until you get hands-on and actually have a go at doing something, everything remains a mystery, doesn't it? And I would say that the only way I've learned to do what I do is I've made over 1,000 videos. So, most of them are really short. Don't get overexcited. They're not feature films, but it's the high variety, high quantity, and it's doing it for fun as well. Like I'll make videos not because they're being commissioned or I'm getting paid for, but just as a cathartic sort of expression, artistic expression, if you like. I'm not sad, you know, I save money on going to a therapist by expressing myself, by chopping up videos. So I think, I don't think that's much help to what you're saying, but I would say that, you know, and it's back to the earlier point of, if you might not have the footage, because footage, to go out and get good, interesting footage to make something is very time consuming and weather dependent even. Whereas you can download a video and cut up your own mashup of it, you know, and in dissembling somebody else's work, you're learning a little bit more about what works and what doesn't. So I think you've got exactly the right approach. Learn by doing, and the more you do, the more you get that thing that you can't buy, and that's experience.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to learn the hard way, isn't it, really, and make mistakes, yeah.
Unfortunately, that's 98% of times that you learn is by dropping the ball so hard that it breaks your toe, and you think, I'm not doing that again. You know, I could have dropped some serious tips today, and because you haven't suffered a time or financial penalty through making them mistakes, they don't really have a weight, a resonance of consequence.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Any others?
Come on, there must be one more. Just one more. Don't be shy. No, I think everybody is completely saturated in editing knowledge. Completely not what you expected, Mark, and I'm a little bit gutted.
Oh, well, you just talked yourself about another gig, mate. So I was glad she'd come back next week talking Final Cut Pro, but don't bother.
Oh.
You want to come back next week talking about Final Cut Pro?
Listen. It might surprise you to learn, Mark, but I'm quite happy talking. Listen,
let's come back and do something on actual using the timeline. And
okay, fine. I'll have to find a timeline to use, won't I? What should we do? I will think about that later.
Yeah, find something you're working on. Show how you layer stuff up on a on a timeline. The sorts of things you can do. I think that'd be useful.
Yeah, I just found out there's an interesting aside. If anybody's using a Mac, you can Blackmagic's DaVinci Resolve is the non-studio version is free, and it's a traditional NLE editor where you've got your video tracks, your 2 video tracks, which is different from Final Cut Pro. And perhaps next week we can get into the difference between the two. But and the reason why Final Cut just blows everything else out of the water for speed. But one nice feature in it that you might want to avail yourselves of that might help in disseminating other people's work is you can import a source movie into DaVinci Resolve and get it to basically sense where all the edit points are, and it'll turn a video clip into all the component clips in the video. And it's just, it might be just a nice tool if anybody's feeling particularly bored on a rainy day, just to disseminate a film that you like and to see the components of it. So that's something I've been having endless fun using. But I would say it's not for the faint-hearted. It's very feature-rich and a little bit intimidating. But again, if you've got an inquisitive mind and if you're the type of person that likes to take things apart and not be able to put them back together, it's this sort of endeavour that might tickle your fancy.
All right. Well, let's agree then. You're going to come back next week and show us how to use the editing software, and whether it's Final Cut Pro or all your thoughts on other stuff as well, like Windows Movie Maker and whatever.
Yeah, I think if we see a stacked timeline in Final Cut, you can conceptually absolve it to another. Fine, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that.
I'll cancel my holidays.
What to Yarmouth? Those holidays. As long as you're online,
I tell a good yarn with my mouth. That's about
as long as you're online, you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
It's all good. No, I haven't got any holidays.
All right, great stuff. Thanks, Cole. That's absolutely
thank you.
brilliant.
Thank you, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks for putting up with me. Thank you. I'll do a press stop. Right, I'm going to leave now. Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
As digital Moses wanders off into the desert once more, leaving us with his having laid down the law with his commandments, his nine commandments. Then he leaves us wiser than we began. All right, it's coming up to have sex, man. That's how time flies when you're listening to taxonomy of cuts in editing. Let's take a break. Let's have a cup of tea and come back in 15 minutes or so. Come back 6:45, and we'll have a chat about some stuff, and we'll maybe watch some films together, watch some movies, and talk about them. Your homework, of course, this week is just to watch the telly, and to sit and bore your partners or your kids and say, "Look, there's a J cut. There's an L cut. That's a jump cut." Right? Just identify this stuff that Colin's talking about. These techniques of sequencing images. All right, let's have a break. Come back in 50 minutes. What, 6:45?
Yeah.
We'll see you then. All right. Bye.